The granola bar in my hand had gone soft in the wrapper, but I ate it anyway while my fourth call of the morning connected. It was not even 6:30 yet. The kitchen still smelled like scorched coffee from the pot I had forgotten to rinse the night before. My screen lit up. A new vice president I had never worked with before glanced at my name and said, almost casually, "Can you take notes on this one?" I said, "Sure." Then I muted myself and wrote something else down. 2 days later, I was standing in my apartment with an old contract open on my laptop and a badge in my hand, looking at one line that still had my name on it. At the time, though, none of that was visible yet. It just felt like another long morning. My name is Daniel. I was 41 then, living outside Columbus, Ohio, in a townhouse that was always a little too quiet before sunrise. I had been carrying one of our largest enterprise accounts for years. Not in the way people talk about in meetings. I mean the real kind of carrying. Late calls, escalations, patchwork fixes. The kind of work that keeps a contract alive while other people present slides about momentum. That morning had started around 4:10 with a regional delivery failure that could have pushed us out of compliance before most people were awake. I was still in a t-shirt, still half tired, standing barefoot on cold kitchen tile while dashboards refreshed across 2 monitors. The refrigerator hummed. Rain tapped lightly against the back window. I remember all of it because the room was so ordinary, and the day turned out not to be. Back when the company was smaller, the founder used to say I was the last set of hands on the rope. If something slipped, I caught it. If a client was about to walk, I kept them in the room. He said it once on a leadership call years earlier, and I never forgot it because he was not a man who wasted words. After he stepped back, things changed slowly, then all at once. The work stayed the same. The language around it changed. Now it was all alignment, visibility, transformation, operating rhythm. People who had never stayed on a bridge call past midnight were suddenly explaining execution to everyone else. They polished decks. They trimmed updates until there was nothing useful left in them. They moved numbers around on dashboards until the picture looked clean on a phone screen. Meanwhile, I was still talking to engineers in 3 time zones, still keeping handwritten notes beside my keyboard, still opening raw logs because half the room no longer seemed to know where the Real story lived. I did not complain about it. That was never my style. I kept records instead. Not dramatic records. Just careful ones. A save message here. A time-stamped export there. A copy of an update with my name removed and someone else's added above it. I had a private folder on a backup drive where I kept the things that did not fit the official version of events. Process changes. Access logs. Old client approvals. Screenshots from late-night threads that looked harmless until you line them up in order. I was not building a case back then. I was keeping my bearings. The new vice president came in that spring. His name was Brent. Early 30s, maybe. Smooth voice. Crisp quarter-zip pullovers. The kind of person who leaned back too easily on camera, like every meeting was already going his way. He had come from a strategy shop with the usual polished reputation. Before the end of his first week, people were describing him as decisive. I noticed something else first. He never asked where the weak points were. He asked who owned communication, who controlled visibility, who needed to be in which room. Those are different questions, and if you have worked long enough inside an operations team, you can feel the difference immediately. The first time we were on a leadership call together, he gave me a quick nod and asked if I could capture action items. He smiled when he said it, like he was being efficient. I said, of course. There was a little pause after that. Not awkward, just enough. He laughed and kept going. Within days, client reviews started disappearing from my calendar. Standing operations syncs moved without me. A dashboard I had built over 2 quarters showed up in a presentation under a new label with my tracking logic still inside it, just cleaned up for display. My director sent me a note saying reporting lines were being streamlined and there was nothing to worry about. I read it twice, then saved it. The office itself had that stale, over-air-conditioned smell every large building gets by midweek. Carpet cleaner, burnt espresso, printer heat. On the days I went in, I would sit at my desk near the back row and listen to the soft clicking of badge doors while people passed by talking about scale. I kept doing what I always did. Quiet fixes, quiet follow-ups, quiet documentation. The louder Brent got, the quieter I became. That turned out to matter. By the second week, a message appeared in the company Slack from him about clearing out legacy clutter in our systems. No names, No direct tags, but anyone close to the account knew what he meant. A few people dropped reaction emojis under it. A few others added comments about modernizing operations. I took a screenshot and filed it. A week later, he pushed a deployment window over my objection, and we missed an internal failover check for the first time in months. I flagged it in the channel. He responded, "Let's not create noise. We can review offline." We never reviewed it offline. One night, close to midnight, I caught an alert from a region he had marked as stable earlier that day. The notification had been muted under a maintenance label. It should not have been. I pulled the thread, exported the incident, and saved that too. Then I waited. Around the 5th week, I lost access to the client dashboard altogether. No warning, no call. I just logged in on a Monday morning and hit a permissions wall. I sent Brent a short message asking for reinstatement ahead of the quarterly business review. He replied 15 minutes later. "No need. We're consolidating ownership. The support group in Manila will handle prep from here." I looked at that message for a while. Then I opened a folder I had not touched in almost 3 years. Inside it was the original master agreement from 2020, along with draft notes, red lines, and the final signed copy. I remembered the week it was negotiated. I remembered the pressure on the client side, the overnight revisions, the way one specific section had taken longer than it should have because they wanted one accountable name tied to continuity if things ever went sideways. I found the clause in under a minute. Then I sat back in my chair, listened to the rain at the window, and read it again in silence. The clause was still there. Same numbering, same wording, same intent. It named the client's right to terminate if the designated continuity lead resigned voluntarily, and it named that lead directly. Me. Not my department. Not my role. Me. I did not react much when I saw it. I just read the page once, then again, slower the second time. The kitchen was quiet except for the low rattle of the dishwasher I had started before sunrise. A thin line of gray morning light sat across the counter. My coffee had already gone lukewarm. Back in 2020, the account had been in rough shape from the start. Their risk team wanted a single person tied to escalation because too many issues had bounced between groups without ownership. That was not an abstract concern. Systems were unstable. Timelines were slipping. Everyone was improvising. On their side, the lead on that negotiation had been a woman named Rebecca. Sharp voice. No wasted words. Every time we were on a call together, she had her camera off and her notes ready before anyone else joined. You could hear pages turning when other people were still making small talk. One morning she said, "I don't want a team name in this section. I want one accountable person." Our legal group tried to soften it, broaden the language, make it more flexible. She did not budge. I remember sitting at my desk with a headset on, one shoe half untied, reading through a markup version while the office lights hummed overhead. It was early. Cleaning staff were still moving carts down the hall. She said, "If we're putting millions of dollars through this process, I need to know exactly who owns it when things get messy." I said, "Then put my name there." There was a little silence after that. Then she said, "All right." That was how it happened. No grand moment. Just a tired week, a clean sentence, and a decision nobody on our side seemed to think about again. I had thought about it. Not constantly, just enough to remember it existed. Over the next few days, I kept working as though nothing had changed. I joined the meetings I was still invited to. I answered direct messages. I closed out issues. I sent status notes in the same neutral tone I had always used. The difference was that I started watching more carefully. The company had that strange mood it gets when a reorganization is underway and no one wants to say it out loud. People smiled too quickly. Messages got shorter. Certain calendar invites came without agendas. Others disappeared altogether. There was always someone standing just outside the conference room, laptop tucked against their chest, speaking more quietly than usual. Brent seemed energized by all of it. He posted updates about efficiency. He talked about reducing dependencies. He liked phrases that sounded clean from a distance. Scalable coverage, modern delivery design, leaner accountability. You could almost hear the edges being sanded off the truth. I watched him present one of my old reporting models to senior leadership with new labels across the top and my exception logic stripped out from view. It looked elegant that way. Neat. Contained. Anyone who did not know the account would have thought the system was finally becoming simpler. It was actually becoming more fragile. That is the kind of thing you can feel before you can prove it. A client escalation came in from Europe late one afternoon. Usually those landed with me first. This one did not. I only saw it because one of the engineers copied me out of habit. By the time I opened the thread, Brent had already answered with a polished note about process optimization and offshore support continuity. It read well enough. It also ignored the actual issue. I fixed the issue quietly, then saved the thread. A few days later, I was removed from a shared folder tied to quarterly review prep. That one surprised me more than the dashboard access change had. The folder held years of client history, approvals, dependency notes, exception handling, and archive decisions from the messy period when the account had been stabilized. Anyone coming in fresh would need those records to understand why certain things existed. I opened the admin log. The permissions had been changed manually. I took a screenshot, noted the timestamp, and added it to the folder on my backup drive. I did not title anything dramatically, just dates and plain labels. Access change, review deck revision, escalation reroute. It helped to keep everything simple. Facts hold their shape better that way. Around then, HR sent me a calendar invite with no subject beyond quick sync. It landed in the middle of my afternoon, between a vendor review and a backlog cleanup call. No context, no note. I accepted it. The meeting room was cold when I walked in. One of those interior rooms with no windows and a table that always felt slightly too large for the space. There were 3 people already there. An HR manager, someone from people operations I had seen once before, and Brent. A paper cup of water sat near the far corner of the table, untouched. The HR manager gave me the kind of smile people use when they want the tone to feel settled before any real words are spoken. She said they wanted to make sure everyone was aligned on transition planning and role clarity. I asked, "Am I being terminated?" She blinked once and looked at Brent before answering. "No, there is no termination in progress." I nodded, stood up, and said, "All right." Then I left. I did not rush. I did not close the door hard. I just walked back to my desk, sat down, and opened my inbox. There are moments when the room around you seems to sharpen. The sound of keyboards, the vent above the ceiling tile, a phone vibrating 2 rows over. Everything ordinary gets clearer because your mind has stopped trying to make excuses for what is happening. That was one of those moments. I sent one message to my team. Do not forward anything to personal email. That was all. The replies started coming within minutes. Small ones first, then more direct ones. Is something going on? Are you okay? Did they say anything? I did not answer any of them right away. Instead, I opened the contract again at my desk and read the clause a 3rd time. Then I checked the file permissions on the original archive copy. Then I reviewed the signed version against the red line. Then I made sure the download log was active. I was not rushing toward anything. I was checking alignment. That is the best way I can put it. The next morning, the access log showed activity on the contract folder from legal. Not one view, several. Then compliance. Then someone whose account I did not recognize. By lunchtime, the signed agreement had been opened multiple times and exported more than once. No one reached out to me, but they did not need to. The pattern told me enough. Someone had finally started reading the old paper. That afternoon, a message appeared in one of the larger internal channels asking whether anyone had the original MSA for the enterprise risk account. No one answered in the thread. A few minutes later, the message was deleted. I took note of that too. Brent's tone shifted slightly after that. It was subtle, still polished, still forward-leaning, but more careful around specifics. He stopped saying certain things in writing. He began asking for verbal updates instead of documented ones. He used phrases like subject to review and pending legal alignment, where he had previously sounded certain. That told me he still did not understand the full shape of the problem, but someone around him probably did. A day later, he called me for the first time. Not on video, just a direct line. He kept his tone light, almost conversational. He said there had been some misunderstandings about role changes and visibility. He said the company appreciated the groundwork I had laid and wanted to preserve what mattered while modernizing delivery. I let him finish. Then I asked one question. Did you clear the continuity change with client legal? He paused for half a beat, then said, legal works with us on those issues. That was not an answer. I said, that contract has named lead language tied to continuity. If you reassign ownership without understanding the clause, you may be creating termination rights. He gave a short laugh. Not mocking exactly, just dismissive. I think you're overreading it. Maybe I was supposed to argue after that. Maybe I was supposed to defend my importance or explain the history or try one more time to make him see the structure underneath the account. I did not do any of that. I said, "All right." Then I ended the call and wrote down the time. That evening, I stayed later than usual. Most of the floor had emptied out by then. The overhead lights in the far section had switched to half power, leaving the walkway dimmer near the windows. Someone had left a mug in the sink in the break room. The smell of burnt popcorn still hung in the air from earlier. I sat at my desk with my jacket folded over the chair back and looked through years of notes I had kept without really thinking about them. Old outage summaries, escalation maps, client preferences nobody had formally documented, manual workarounds that had become invisible because they never failed in public. For the first time, I organized them not by topic, but by sequence. What had changed first? Who had approved what? Which records disappeared? Which ones remained? It was not emotional work. It was administrative, quiet, methodical. Outside, the parking lot lights had come on. Their pale reflection sat across the dark office windows. I closed one folder, opened another, and kept going until the building felt almost hollow around me. Then I found myself looking at a blank notepad. I wrote 3 lines on it. What is true on paper? What has changed in practice? What happens if I stop holding the gap? I set the pen down and read those lines for a while. Then I reached for the contract again. The contract looked different that night. Not because the words had changed. They had not. It was the same signed document, the same margin notes in the archive draft, the same line that named me as the continuity lead. What changed was the context around it. Once I stopped looking at it as old paperwork and started looking at it beside the access changes, the meeting removals, the reassigned dashboards, and the quiet legal traffic, the structure became very plain. I was no longer in the role operationally. On paper, I still was. That gap mattered. I stayed in the office until nearly 8 o'clock, not doing anything dramatic, just sorting. My desk lamp threw a small pool of light across a stack of printed notes, while the rest of the floor sat dim and still. Every now and then I heard the elevator open down the hall, then close again. The vending machine near the break room gave off a low mechanical hum. I remember rubbing my thumb along the edge of one printout because the paper had a rough cut on one corner. I built a timeline, not a speech, not a complaint, just a timeline. First, the meeting removals, then the dashboard reassignment, then the access overrides, then the client folder restrictions, then the written statement that offshore support would take over, then the HR meeting where I was told I was not being terminated, even as my actual work was being stripped away. I put every piece in order. When I was done, I looked at the page and realized something I probably should have admitted earlier. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a decision tree someone else had already started. They were transitioning the account away from me in practice while assuming the old paper either did not matter or would never be tested. That was the first real shift for me. Up to that point, I had still been half in the mode of waiting for a correction, a call from legal, a note from leadership, a quiet acknowledgement that the new structure had moved too fast and missed something important. By then, I understood that correction was not coming on its own, so I stopped thinking emotionally. I started thinking in steps. Step 1, confirm what was still valid. I checked the signed agreement against the latest amendment history. No changes to the clause, no substitution language, no revised continuity schedule. The original protection was intact. Step 2, confirm what had changed operationally. I reviewed access logs, meeting removals, written ownership changes, and the messages that moved work away from me without changing the contract. The gap was real, traceable, and recent. Step 3, say nothing until the facts became self-explanatory. That part mattered the most. Silence gets misunderstood all the time. People assume it means passivity, uncertainty, maybe even surrender. In some situations it does. In others, it is just discipline. I had no interest in arguing with people who had already shown they preferred polished language over plain records. If this was going to resolve, it needed to resolve through documents, dates, and their own decisions. So I kept quiet. The next morning, I went to work like always. Cold air in the car, traffic moving slow on the highway, a faint orange strip of sun behind low clouds. I stopped for coffee from the small place near the office park where the lids never fit quite right. The girl at the register knew my order by then. Medium black, no room. I carried it upstairs and sat down at my desk before most of the floor had filled in. The day looked normal from a distance. Emails, routine updates, a vendor question, 2 minor alerts that cleared on their own. Brent posted something in the leadership channel around 9:20 about standardizing client engagement ownership. He did not mention me directly. He did not need to. The phrase was careful, almost too careful. It was written the way people write when they're trying to build cover in advance. I saved it. Around noon, one of the engineers on my team stopped by my desk. He did not sit down, just stood there with one hand on the back of the spare chair like he was not sure how long he should stay. He asked if everything was okay. I told him, "Do your work the way you always do. Keep your notes clean." He nodded. That was enough. I was careful with everyone after that. No venting, no hints, no fishing for loyalty. Once people sense that a situation may turn, they start reacting to the possibility instead of the facts. I did not want noise. I wanted the record to remain clear. That afternoon, I got a view notification on the archived contract folder again. Legal, then compliance, then general counsel. Not one after another in a panic. More like a slow, repeated verification. Open, close, reopen, export, reopen. The kind of pattern you see when the first reader passes it to the second and the second realizes the first was not exaggerating. I leaned back in my chair and let the screen go dim for a second. Then I waited. Late that day, Brent stopped by my desk in person. He had a practiced ease about him, the kind that can feel friendly until you notice it never changes with the room. He rested one hand on the divider wall and said he appreciated the groundwork I had done on the account. Said the company was trying to preserve core knowledge while evolving delivery. Said there might be a role for me in broader strategic operations if I stayed flexible. I listened. He smiled once or twice while he talked, as though we were smoothing out a misunderstanding between reasonable people. When he finished, I said, "Have you read the original continuity section in the 2020 agreement?" His expression changed just a little. Not much, just enough to show that he recognized the reference, but probably still had not read it himself. He said, "Legal is reviewing all active materials." I said, "That was not my question." There was a pause then, a small one. He shifted his weight and gave a lighter answer than the moment called for. "I'm not concerned." I nodded. "All right." That was the entire conversation. He walked away still trying to look unbothered. I turned back to my monitor and reopened an issue log. No debate, no warning, just one question, asked plainly and answered by what he avoided. The all-hands meeting invite came through the next day. Quarterly alignment, mandatory attendance, board members included. Those meetings usually followed the same pattern. Intro remarks, executive updates, account summaries, forward strategy. My section had traditionally been buried around the middle, after the polished framing but before the long-range forecasts. That was where the real numbers usually lived. This time, my name was still on the agenda, but the sequence looked off. I printed it. Then I opened a blank document and drafted a resignation letter. It was short, 1 page, clean, effective immediately with a specific time. No accusations, no grand language, no attempt to tell them what they had done wrong. That was already in the records. The letter only needed to do one thing: state the fact. I read it once, corrected one date line, and printed 2 copies. Then I folded 1 copy and placed it in a plain envelope. At some point while I was doing that, I noticed how calm I felt. Not satisfied, not angry, just settled. The office around me carried on like usual. A nearby team was laughing over a speakerphone delay in one of their calls. Someone in the hall was talking about airport pickup for a client visit. An email notification chimed 3 times in quick succession from my laptop. Life inside the building had not changed yet, which made the clarity of the next steps feel even sharper. That evening, I went home a little earlier than I had the night before. I made something simple for dinner: toast and eggs. Stood at the counter while the skillet cooled. The townhouse was quiet except for the ceiling fan over the living room and the occasional passing car outside. I set the envelope on the table, beside my keys, and looked at it while I ate. Then I cleaned the kitchen, wiped the counters, rinsed the pan, set the mug in the dishwasher. It sounds small, but those details mattered. Once I knew what I was going to do, the need for order got stronger. Not ceremony, just order. After that, I opened my laptop one more time and reviewed the clause again. alongside the latest access logs and the written message stating I was no longer needed for the account. I saved the files to a second drive. Then I checked the timestamp settings on the resignation letter. Then I turned to the final practical detail, the background for the call. I kept it simple. Black screen, white text, effective 9:01 a.m. Nothing more. I tested it once on camera, then closed the settings window. The next morning, I went into the office before sunrise and cleaned out my desk without making a show of it. Old notebooks, spare cables, a few paper files I no longer needed. I stacked what belonged to the company in one neat section. Badge, laptop, headset. Everything else went into a canvas bag I had brought from home. By 8:40, the floor was beginning to wake up. Chairs rolling back, muted greetings, printers starting up. I sat down in front of my monitor with the envelope beside my keyboard and the meeting invite open on screen. Then I looked at the clock and waited. At 8:52, I joined the call. Camera on, mic muted, background ready. The meeting grid filled in the way those large company calls always do, one square at a time. A few people were already talking before the host started, their voices thin and bright through laptop speakers. Someone was adjusting a headset. Someone else had their camera pointed too low, so all you could see was a chin and a ceiling light. In one square, a board member sat in a quiet office with framed photos behind him. In another, legal was already present, camera on, expression neutral. Brent came on a minute later with the usual polished energy. Crisp shirt, bright office, a smile he seemed to wear by default in front of groups. The company logo sat on the opening slide behind his face. He thanked everyone for joining, said there was a lot of momentum, said the quarter had created new opportunities to modernize delivery and sharpen alignment across enterprise operations. I listened without taking notes. My envelope sat beside the keyboard. My badge was on top of it. At 8:57, more people joined. The participant count ticked up. 102, 118, 129, then higher. By 8:59, the board was fully in. General counsel was there. HR, finance. A few senior people who usually skipped unless something was important. Brent started right on time. He moved through the first slides with his usual pace. Revenue headlines, structural changes, delivery improvements. The language was cleaner than the reality beneath it, but by then I expected that. He talked about reducing manual dependency. He talked about modernizing account stewardship. He said the company had entered a new phase of discipline scale. I noticed the word continuity on one slide and almost smiled. He was trying to build certainty with language. That is difficult to do when the paper says something else. I kept one eye on the clock in the corner of the screen. The numbers moved slowly. 8:59, then 9 o'clock. Brent shifted to a slide about the enterprise risk account. My account, the largest one in his deck. He started describing a new operating model, regional support structure, consolidated ownership, faster response through distributed coverage. Everything was framed as progress, a move away from single points of failure, he said, as though history had simply arranged itself that way. Then he said my name, not warmly, not coldly either, just in that neutral executive tone people use when they are trying to make a decision sound procedural. As of this week, he said, Daniel will be transitioning out of direct involvement on this account while the new structure takes over. I heard a couple of quiet keyboard sounds from unmuted squares. Someone shifted in their chair. One board member looked down, maybe at notes, maybe at nothing. That was my cue. At exactly 9:01, I turned my camera on. It took a second for people to register the change. Another square appearing in the grid is not unusual on a large call. But once the background came into focus, attention moved. A black screen behind me, white letters centered and plain. Effective 9:01 a.m. I did not say anything. I lifted the badge in one hand, the resignation letter in the other. Signed, dated, time visible. I held both where the camera could read them clearly and kept my face still. The room changed all at once, though nobody raised their voice. That is the strange thing about certain moments. They do not get loud first. They get quiet. Brent stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. One of the board members leaned toward the screen. General counsel's face changed in a way I had not seen before. Not panic, not surprise exactly. More like recognition arriving faster than he wanted it to. A few chat notifications started ticking in at the side of the screen. Then more. Brent recovered first, or tried to. He gave a short laugh that did not land and said, Daniel, We can handle this offline. I stayed silent. He tried again, this time with a little edge around the words. There's no need to do this in this setting. Still, I said nothing. Silence can be uncomfortable for people who rely on momentum. They expect the conversation to keep moving. They expect you to explain, soften, negotiate, or rescue them from the meaning of what is already visible. When none of that happens, the facts have to stand on their own. That was the point. One of the squares in legal flickered, then muted. Someone was clearly speaking off camera. Another board member took off his glasses and looked down at his desk. Brent kept his smile in place for another few seconds, but it had gone thin. The chat was moving faster now. Is this official? What's happening? Was legal informed? No one answered in the main room. I lowered the badge and the letter just enough to place them side by side on the desk in front of me, still within frame. Then I looked directly at the camera. Not angry, not wounded, just present. Brent said my name one more time, softer this time, as if volume might solve what words could not. When I still did not respond, he turned away from my square and tried to continue with the deck. He got through part of one sentence about transition plans before stopping again. He knew, by then, that the meeting had already ended in every way that mattered. I clicked leave. The screen went black. For a second, all I heard was the soft whir of the office vent above me. Then the room came back. Desk, monitor, carpet, the faint smell of reheated breakfast from somewhere down the hall. My own reflection in the dark screen. I closed the laptop lid. I slid the badge and the letter into the envelope. Then I stood up. I left the company laptop on the desk, headset beside it, access card no longer around my neck. My canvas bag was light in my hand because I had packed almost nothing personal. As I walked down the aisle between workstations, a few people looked up. No one stopped me. One person started to say my name and then thought better of it. I gave a small nod and kept going. The elevator ride down was quiet. In the lobby, the morning sun had finally come through the cloud cover. Thin bands of light stretched across the tile floor near the glass doors. A receptionist was on the phone speaking in a low, careful voice. Somewhere upstairs, I imagined the call still open, people speaking faster now, decks abandoned, language no longer helping. Outside, the air had that cool, dry feel that comes just after a gray morning starts to clear. I set the envelope on the passenger seat of my car and sat there for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel. 9:04. That was the time on the dashboard. I did not start the car right away. I just sat and listened to the engine tick as the sun moved a little higher across the front of the building. By then, messages were probably already moving through legal, finance, and leadership. Someone was pulling up the contract. Someone else was confirming the named lead clause. Someone was likely asking when the account transition had been approved and by whom. I did not need to hear any of it. The record would do its job. When I finally drove home, I left my phone face down in the cup holder the entire way. Traffic was light. A delivery truck moved slowly ahead of me for several miles. At one red light, I noticed my hands were steady. Back at the townhouse, I took off my shoes by the door, made fresh coffee, and opened the blinds in the kitchen. The room smelled cleaner than it had a few days earlier because I had wiped everything down the night before. Sunlight fell across the counter in long, warm lines. For the first time in months, there was nowhere I needed to be immediately. I set the envelope in the top drawer beside the printed contract copy. Then I waited. Around 10:20, the first voicemail came in. Unknown number. Then another. Then legal. Then HR. I did not listen to any of them. Near noon, a message arrived from Rebecca on the client side. Just one line. Can you call when you have a minute? I read it once, set the phone down, and looked out through the kitchen window at the small patch of grass behind the townhouse. Nothing moved out there except a loose branch in the wind. I still did not call anyone. Instead, I opened my laptop, logged into the personal backup drive, and checked one thing only. The archived contract folder had been accessed repeatedly since 9:03. Legal, compliance, executive review. Then one new entry from the client domain. I read the log, closed the laptop, and put the phone face down again. I left the phone where it was and let the afternoon move on without me. That was not avoidance. It was restraint. Once something becomes a legal fact instead of a workplace disagreement, there is very little value in adding commentary too early. I knew the contract language. I knew the timing. I knew the account had already been transitioned in practice before anyone had dealt with the paper. At that point, the next part belonged to process. so I stayed out of the way. The townhouse was quiet except for the refrigerator cycling on and off and the soft tapping of a branch against the back fence when the wind picked up. I made a sandwich around 1 o'clock, cut an apple, poured a glass of ginger ale, and ate at the counter without turning on the television. My phone buzzed a few more times and then went still. Around 2:15, I checked it. 15 missed calls, a few voicemails, several messages from former coworkers asking if I was all right. One from Rebecca again, this time a little more direct. Need to confirm something. Call me when convenient. I called her back. She answered on the first ring. No small talk. No build-up. That was her way. Did you resign at 9:01 this morning? She asked. Yes. A short pause. And they had already moved direct continuity functions away from you. Yes. Another pause, a paper sound in the background, maybe a printed agreement being turned over on a desk. Then she said, all right. That's what I needed. I could hear voices on her side, muffled and distant. A door closed somewhere near her. When she came back on, her tone had not changed at all. You understand what happens next. I do. She let a second pass. Then she said, for what it's worth, I told them not to play games with named accountability. I remember. That got the smallest hint of a laugh from her. Tired more than amused. Of course you do, she said. We ended the call a minute later. No strategy talk. No emotional processing. Just confirmation. I put the phone down and stood at the sink for a while, rinsing my glass even though it did not need rinsing yet. Outside, the afternoon light had flattened into that pale, colorless stretch you get before evening starts to warm up again. Across the back fence, someone's dog barked twice and then stopped. By early evening, the consequences had started to surface without anyone needing to explain them to me. A former coworker I trusted sent a short message. Not gossip, not opinion, just 3 facts. Emergency board call. Legal reviewing continuity language. Brent not speaking much. I read it and deleted it. An hour later, another message came through from someone else. They're asking when legal first flagged the clause. That one I kept for a while before deleting too. I did not want a live feed of the collapse. I only wanted enough to understand whether the process was unfolding the way the document said it would. There is a difference. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, which used to happen a lot when I was still carrying the account. For a moment, I lay there expecting the usual rush of overnight issues and unread alerts. Instead, there was only the ceiling fan and the faint sound of a garbage truck somewhere down the street. I made coffee slowly. Same mug. Same kitchen. The calm in the room felt unfamiliar at first, like I had missed something important. Then I remembered I had not missed anything. I had just stepped out of the machinery. At 7:12, the formal notice arrived. Not to me directly at first. I heard about it from the same quiet source inside the company who had been careful the day before. Then a few minutes later, Rebecca forwarded me the public-facing version that included only what I was allowed to see. A signed termination notice from their general counsel. Subject line clean and plain. Exercise of continuity clause. 5 sentences. No anger in it. No long explanation. Just the relevant section cited. The triggering event identified, and the contract terminated effective immediately. Years of work, millions in revenue, months of executive language, all cut straight through by 1 page and the paper trail beneath it. I sat at the kitchen table and read the notice twice. Then I folded it and placed it beside the printed agreement. That was the confrontation, really. Not the meeting. Not Brent trying to regain control on camera. Not the calls I chose not to answer. The real confrontation happened through documents. 1 signed resignation. 1 clause. 1 outside counsel notice. No debate. No spin. Just reality moving through the channels that actually mattered. Later that morning, more details found their way out. A board member,